Welcome to Inside Drug Discovery. This video is a reaction. It's a reaction to a video put out by Grant Harting, who is a big content creator. I was not familiar with his channel until a few days ago. I saw a short, and his short, which already has 12 million views, had kind of a strong position on a topic. Now, he later put out another video, a long-form video, that was a little bit more moderated in its position, and that is the video to which I'm going to react. So let's go ahead and get into this video. Okay, here we are. Let's go get started.
Hamburgers, hot dogs, freedom, and Medicare fraud. It's the things that make us American. But today I'm going to show you a scam that has plagued my existence every single day since I've been a pharmacist. I'm actually a licensed pharmacist in 4 states. My name is Grant Harting, and I like to uncover scams and fraud. Today I'm going to show you a multi-hundred-million-dollar fraud scam. But it's technically not fraud because the government allows it. And to do that, all I have to do is go into Walmart here and make 2 simple purchases. As we'll see here soon, these companies like to hide minimal innovation under huge payments to Medicare, or bills rather to Medicare. So I guess it's technically not fraud because Medicare and our government knows it's happening. I guess it's more like price gouging, really. But it's so obscene, but it's hidden from the general public. Like only a pharmacist knows, and a lot of times doctors and nurses too. But if you're not in this field, you would never know because the difference is so minute, yet they charge thousands and thousands of dollars a month. And I checked, and I'm going to verify here. I think the total is, and this is just in my brief research, like a couple $100 million in waste. But who knows? Like over the course of like the past couple of decades and many different drugs, I have no idea what the total could even possibly be. Anyway, let's go in here and I'll stop rambling and I'll show you exactly what I'm talking about.
Okay, so he is going to go into details about this shortly, but it is not fraud. It may be dubious or shady or highly suspect, but it's not fraud.
Once you get your favorite pharmacist smile on, you just go to Walmart and make your way to the pharmacy section. And I want to show you 2 really...
So for full disclosure, I have no interest in, no financial interest in Walmart, but I might shop there every weekend.
important meds. First one here is omeprazole. Now, omeprazole has a delayed release coating on it. You can see it right there under the words omeprazole. Now, that is significant because it protects it from the stomach. The second one is aspirin, and again, you can see the words delayed release there. It's very important, and it does exactly what it sounds like. It delays the release of the medication.
I'm so excited. I got 2 new cool medications to play with. Okay, but that's enough screwing around. I have to tell you something very
let's get locked in.
important. I have 2 really simple, very common medications here. The first is omeprazole. Omeprazole is a proton pump inhibitor. It's used to reduce stomach acid. Think if somebody has like acid reflux, it's kind of uncomfortable, and this helps.
Okay, omeprazole was one of the blockbuster drugs of the late 1980s. At the time, it was prescription only, so there was no over-the-counter purchase at Walmart for omeprazole. So Americans with heartburn had this great renaissance in the late 70s. A new class of drugs came out. These were histamine blocking drugs, and this is Zantac and Tagamet were 2 of the big names. Massively successful blockbuster drugs in their own right. And then following on the heels of that was another class of drugs, and that includes omeprazole, which is sold under the brand name of Prilosec, and then also Prevacid. And these were great times of late 70s, late 80s for the high-carb, high-fat American diet.
Now, if you notice right below the word omeprazole, it says delayed release there. That's very significant to what we're talking about today. Delayed release is a term that indicates that the medication is essentially going to be dispersed later than normal, I guess is the best way to put it. Contrary to popular belief, medications by and large are not absorbed in the stomach. They're absorbed in the small intestine, the part after the stomach. The purpose of the stomach is to break things down. The purpose of the intestines is to absorb nutrients, or in this case, medications.
So the small intestines have a much greater surface area than the stomach, and that makes them better for absorption in general than the stomach. There are exceptions, but it is true. The small intestines do the heavy lifting for absorption typically.
Now, there's several reasons why you would want something to be delayed release. In the case of omeprazole, the active chemical, omeprazole itself, is acid liable.
What you're looking at here is an idiot. The term is labile. I don't know why I said liable.
I know why he said liable, because he's thinking fraud, as in, with all this fraud, someone should be liable. But he's right. In this case, it's labile.
Labile. Gosh.
Which means that the active ingredient, if it's in your stomach, it's very acidic in your stomach and it'll deactivate the active chemical. And then by the time it gets to the intestines, it'll be a completely different chemical and it won't be absorbed and it won't create its effect. In the case of this other one here, now this is aspirin. Aspirin is an NSAID. That means it's a COX inhibitor. And when it blocks that enzyme, it reduces inflammation and reduces pain. And it's also an effective blood thinner, especially at the 81 milligram dose. A lot of people get upset about the word blood thinner. Technically, this is an antiplatelet. I'll let you decide if that distinction is relevant or not.
That is annoying. But he's right. It is different, but those terms do get used virtually interchangeably all the time.
The purpose of making a delayed release aspirin is so that it actually doesn't dissolve in the stomach. Very coincidentally, this is actually one of the few medications that is absorbed in the stomach to a meaningful extent. But trust me, by and large, this is not the case. It's only aspirin and like a couple other things. Now, the theory behind this is you don't want the aspirin to be in your actual stomach itself because it can cause irritation and perhaps bleeding. I doubt the significance of that, just as a side note, because we have non-delayed release aspirin and people use it all the time. But whatever, that's the theory behind that.
So he's right. Prolonged use of aspirin can be associated with a higher risk of bleeding in the stomach. But if you're taking aspirin for the short term, for a headache, for a pulled muscle, that's probably fine. Now, if you're taking it chronically, such as for something like arthritis, then that may lead to a higher risk of problems.
Did the math, so you don't have to. Each one of these omeprazole pills, these are 20 milligram, are 36 cents. Each one of these 81 milligram aspirin tablets are 1 cent. It's going to be very relevant here in a moment.
That is so cheap. Listen, I know the drug industry gets a black eye, often deservedly so, for the high cost of medications. But historically speaking, the pharmaceutical industry has undeniably created a lot of medications that are fantastically affordable and available now. And that's, it's to the credit. I understand the concerns, but there are some positives.
Also, by the way, I never recommend 81 milligram aspirin unless your doctor tells you to. This is
so that 81 milligram dose, when I was younger, that was the size of a children's chewable tablet. And that became the standard recommendation for mature men and older to take an 81 milligram dose of aspirin just basically every day. No questions asked. And it was to help reduce cardiovascular risk, reduce heart attack and stroke risks. But that advice does seem to have kind of fallen out of favor over time and just disappeared.
Just not effective for pain or fever or anything. Anyway, we need to do some hardcore chemistry here, so let me get set up. To simulate the gastric pH, I just have some hydrochloric acid here, and we want to get this dihydrogen monoxide, also known as water, down to around 5.5. That might be too much. Yeah, it's a little bit lower. Gosh darn it. Well, it's okay for what I'm trying to prove here today.
It is really hard. It takes very little acid to make a massive pH swing in just plain water, distilled water or tap water. It's probably even harder to accurately read the pH of a solution with pH papers. They're notoriously finicky and kind of hard to read. But he's aiming for a certain stomach pH, simulating a stomach pH. There are two common pHs that people use when talking about the pH of your stomach. There's 1.6, and that is the fasted stomach. That's your empty stomach with just the stomach acid. And then pH about 4.5, and there is a range there. That is the fed stomach, so the stomach that has food in it, and that helps mitigate the acidity. The lower the number, the more acidic it is. So, he's looking at maybe 4.5 to 5 pH. If he gets much higher than that, he's actually closer to the pH of the small intestines, which could be anything north of 5. So I think he does want to be on the lower end here.
I just added a little bit more water here. So, yeah, we're around, it's more like a 4.5. We'll call it 5. So let's get our delayed release aspirin out of the box here. These little aspirin pills are so cute. They have a little heart here. I don't know if you can see it. They have a little.
So that's at 80 milligram dose. That would be taken chronically, and maybe an 80 milligram dose is enough aspirin that chronically taken in your stomach can lead to problems. But anyway, this has a coating to make it more absorbed in the small intestines.
Little heart emblem on there. I think that's so cute. Now we need to get our omeprazole capsule out. There we go. You can see these little omeprazole doodads. Nice and pink. So all I'm going to do is dump the contents here into this low pH solution. The omeprazole version has a tablet as well as beads in there. I have no idea why. I actually called the manufacturer one time and they were giving me the runaround, but whatever.
That is weird. Why would you put a tablet inside the capsule? That's odd.
Whatever. And then we'll just put our little aspirin daddy in here as well. Now we'll remove this white background so you can see. And we're just going to let that sit. And what do you think is going to happen? We'll check back at an hour. As you can see, an hour later, and nothing is unchanged. They're all completely intact. Even if I give this a stir and try to break it apart with some friction, everything's just fine. And that's good. That's what it's supposed to do. But look what...
Okay, so he took those pills. They've been in an acidic medium simulating stomach acid for over an hour. And they are still completely intact. So whatever that coating is, that extended release coating, it is durable too. It survives the stomach acid medium. And he's right. That's what they're supposed to do. But he has demonstrated that, before our eyes. These two cheap pills, they work exactly as described. And so now he's going to add another medication. This is diphenhydramine. This is the same active ingredient as in Benadryl. It's the branded form of it. And so this is going to be different.
What happens if I put a non-delayed release tablet in here? This is just diphenhydramine. This is for allergies. It's been 5 minutes and you can already see the pink pill is starting to fall apart.
So after just 5 minutes, those other pills have been in there for over an hour. After 5 minutes, the non-extended release pill is already starting to disintegrate.
And look, whenever I just touch it a little bit, it starts to disperse and it's already breaking apart. The swelling agents in there are pulling water into the tablet and causing it to break and disperse.
Oh, okay, that's interesting. These swelling agents. So apparently these pills contain more than they have a coating or they don't have a coating. They also contain swelling agents. There's actually a lot of ingredients in a pill, and it's not just the medication. These are called excipients, and they affect the properties of that pill. And I'm trying to lead into the idea that these pills themselves are somewhat innovative. Now, listen, maybe it's not rocket science, but there is an innovation and thought and deliberate design nature to these pills to have them behave as they do.
10 minutes later, and you can see the pill is almost completely falling apart. And it's still a little bit intact there. Oh no, it's gone.
Yeah, that is gone. So let's go back just a couple frames. I think he was looking at the omeprazole pill. The pill for the diphenhydramine is totally disintegrated. So, and presumably the diphenhydramine has also dissolved. There's actually a special category. People categorize their medications based on how quickly it dissolves under certain conditions. And the best to be able to qualify your oral drug under the best classification, class 1, it has to be able to dissolve and disintegrate within 15 minutes. And so that the diphenhydramine hit that qualification. That's a desirable property in an orally administered drug.
Gone. So where is the scam here exactly? This delayed release aspirin is only 1 cent per pill. This delayed release of omeprazole is only 36 cents per pill.
And they do. They're cheap and they work as advertised. Okay, so there's no question about that. He showed that.
It is not very expensive to make a delayed release version of something. And what these companies do is they will take an already well-established product, slap a very inexpensive delayed release coating on it, get an FDA approval, somehow convince the FDA that it is new and innovative, and then they have a monopoly. They price gouge Medicare for literally hundreds of millions of dollars.
So we need to talk about this a little bit. Look, we're going to review his 5 steps and then come on back. All right, so let's review these steps. You need to get an established drug, slap on a coating, get FDA approval. You need to sell your idea that this is an innovation to the FDA. So steps 3 and 4 are kind of intertwined. And then you reap the rewards. The rewards are your monopoly. So let's walk through it. Maybe not all of these, but some of these. So we'll start with step 2, slap on a coating. These coatings and this change in formulation, it's not just about the coating. The entire composition of the pill needs to be re-examined. There are a lot of variables that go into constructing an orally delivered pill. Yes, many are relatively simple, but when you want a delayed release, the product does have to perform in a certain way, and that does involve an innovation. Drug companies tend to patent their new formulations because there is an innovation and it represents an investment. So that's number 2. Number 3, get FDA approval. This is not trivial. You do need to perform clinical trials to gain approval. Now, the clinical trials that will be performed for a formulation change will not be nearly as extensive as bringing a new drug into the marketplace, but there's still a lot of work. These are not inexpensive things. Patients have to be enrolled, they have to be monitored, and it's an expensive process. So that is an investment that involves some risk. You also do need to convince the FDA that there is a value here, that's the innovation. What is the value of this new product? Note that your clinical trials will need to be designed likely with a control group. And the control group will probably be taking the non-extended form of the drug. So your trial must establish with statistical significance that your product outperforms the currently available product, the standard of care. And that requires good clinical trial design. And you do have the risk that you won't achieve statistical significance. You might not hit your endpoint. So these are not trivial problems. Now, in terms of the reward that you can potentially reap, yes, you do have, in a sense, a monopoly. You have the FDA will grant market exclusivity, but for something like a formulation redesign, that market exclusivity might only be for a 3-year period. So there is a finite potential reward period for this product. Furthermore, you have to convince physicians to prescribe this product. A product in a marketplace that already has the non-extended release form. And of course, if you misprice your product, then no one's going to pay for it because the benefit of your product will not merit the price that you're trying to charge for. So this is, these 5 steps, they're not a small deal. It's not like designing a product with an extended release coating is a get rich quick scheme. I mean, it's a difficult process. Okay, so those are some thoughts about some of the steps he proposes for perpetuating this scam or underhanded operation.
Hide this under the guise of innovation, but it's nothing significant. Prednisone is a steroid anti-inflammatory medication. It is dispensed every single minute of every single day in the United States. It's very, very cheap. You're looking at like $10 for it. What a company has done is they took prednisone, put a delayed release coating on it, and they charged Medicare $5,000 for it. Between 2017 and 2023, we spent over $116 million on this junk. But here's the thing.
Okay, I'm not sure it's junk. But he's made a very compelling argument for the fact that the benefit of this drug is highly questionable, and it's probably not worth the elevated cost.
Prednisone without that coating on it already exists. It's already effective. People have been using it forever. There is no need to upgrade it with a delayed release coating. And not only that, what I showed you here today is that can very easily be done for literally less than a cent.
It can't be done for less than a cent. For a newly approved drug that has a benefit, and I think he'd argue that it doesn't have much of a benefit, but if it's going to have a benefit, it's going to cost more than a cent, probably a lot more than a cent. Should it be thousands of dollars? Probably not, but it's going to cost more than a cent if it actually provides a benefit.
Most often, I see delayed release prednisone prescribed by mistake. The people who are sending these prescriptions, they're not looking at the pills, they're not looking at the bottle. They just see prednisone, and then they see prednisone DR. They don't know what the DR means. They haven't.
Okay, that is kind of interesting. Like, how do my prescriptions make it from, I'm trying to back him up, how do my prescriptions make it from the doctor's office to the pharmacist? And, I guess it goes through some kind of computer interface. So they've got to pick it off the list. This is interesting to me. We're peeking behind the curtain.
They have no idea that the selection between those two is a $5,000 difference. But particularly in the case of delayed release prednisone, they start this propaganda tour of funding their own studies. There was a company called Horizon Therapeutics that was notorious for this. Thankfully, they're not a company anymore. They make junk products and gouge Medicare, and that's exactly what they did here with prednisone. And they try to justify it by saying something along the lines of, if you take delayed release prednisone at night, it takes 4 hours longer than regular prednisone. Regular prednisone takes about 2 hours, they say, to see the full effect. So about 6 hours later is whenever you see the full effect of our special delayed release prednisone. Meaning, when you wake up, you'll have full therapeutic doses, and that is significant on quality of life. When waking up in the morning, that's when inflammatory markers are the highest. So logically, it makes sense. Is that worth 500 times the price? No one in their right mind would say yes.
Okay, this is great stuff here. So he does admit that there is a logic behind this. So I suspect that's the logic that the company Horizon used on the FDA. I will say, he mentioned self-funded clinical trials. Just about all drug trials are self-funded by the sponsor of the drug. The government's not going to pay that. You and I pay for those trials when the drug is approved, and we pay the price of the drug. So almost all drug trials are self-funded. But there is a design element to these trials. You have to design the trials to meet an endpoint against a control. And so, there is a rationale here. What is the value of that rationale? That's a completely valid question. And he would absolutely say it's not thousands of dollars, and I wouldn't pay it either. But there is a rationale. It's shady, underhanded, but it's not fraud.
So delayed release coatings, they're good. We like those. But slightly changing something that already exists and gouging the American taxpayers, not cool.
Okay, I agree. It's not cool. Price gouging is not cool. No argument here.
But I'm not even mad at the companies that do this. I'm mad at Medicare. Why are they paying for this?
So I agree with this. Stewardship for taxpayer funds seems to be at an all-time low. It's a serious problem, and the government should be able to figure this out. I'm sure Grant Hardings is a super smart guy, but the government ought to have some smart people who can sniff this out as well. This is not a problem that's unique to the United States of America, but we certainly seem to have our fair share of lack of oversight.
If anyone's watching this and you have any other examples, I'd love to hear it. Duexis is another one, which is made by the same company, by the way. They're just scam artists.
Okay, I love his posture here. He is just resigned to the fact, and trying to be in his shoes. Pharmacists are the front-facing. They're the face of receiving drugs, and when people get these drugs and they have a high cost to them, he's got to bear the brunt of that. And if it's a mistake in the doctor's office, he's the one who has to hold the bag and say, here's what your total is. So I get that has to be incredibly frustrating, because everybody's experienced sticker shock on drugs. But his posture, he's done. That's bad.
That's all they do. But anyway, that's the world we live in.
So he mentions this company Horizon, and they're gone now. They were purchased by Amgen, and Amgen did drop this particular product. As far as I understand, this product, this extended release prednisone, is no longer available because Amgen cut that product line out. Now, Amgen did keep some of the assets that Horizon had, some of their research programs that fit well with Amgen's pipeline, but this particular product that he's discussing now, I think is no longer on the market.
Me and every other pharmacist know this, but we can't say anything. It's what the doctor wanted. That's what they always say. So how can we avoid this from happening? You guys see my Crush Cost thing as like the consumer-facing app and website, but before I retire, I want to make sure prescribers are able to accurately assess what they're sending to the pharmacy. Because in this case, like I said, this 2 little letters, DR, is a $5,000 difference. And they don't realize that. I don't think it's the actual doctor themselves, but whoever's sending the prescription doesn't realize that.
Now that's interesting. So this isn't the doctor putting in, they have office staff. Hey, listen, those doctors or their office staff, they need to be careful. They're making big decisions, and they're leaving people like Grant Hardings to hold the bag when there's this big number, and the patient's like, what the heck happened?
Usual and customary price should be right next to the product line. I want to make sure I make that happen. And I want to give doctors' offices the ability to customize their medication list, because another thing that happens is they'll just pick the first thing that shows up alphabetically, not knowing that also has a massive price difference.
That's problematic. Doctors are not looking great here.
Anyway, stick around. I make all sorts of sad little videos like this.
Okay, well, listen, that was super interesting. I disagree on whether this is fraud or not, but it's shady. It's maybe not a scam, but it's scammy. That's for sure. Scam adjacent. Thank you, Grant Hardings, for posting this content. Thank you for your attention, and I hope you enjoyed it. And everybody, please take care.